On December the 5th of 2013, at the age of 95 years old, former President of South Africa Nelson Mandela died. He left behind a South African nation comprehensively changed from the nation he was born into. He was a radical, a revolutionary, a firebrand, an inspiration and a leader. But where did he come from? What formed the man that would become the father of the nation? On the 18th of July 1918, in the village of Mvezo in southeastern South Africa, Nelson Mandela was born. Although given the first name of Rolihlahla, which colloquially meant troublemaker, he would become to be known by his clan name of Madiba. He was born into a family of distinction. His paternal great-great-grandfather was king of the Tambo people in territories that now form part of South Africa's Eastern Cape province. His father, Gadla Henry Mfakaniswa Mandela, was appointed to the position of local chief and councillor to the monarch in 1915, a position he would hold until 1926. A possible sign of Madiba's future tenacity was that his father was recorded as being sacked for corruption. However, his own line was that he lost his position for standing up to unreasonable demands made by the magistrate. The young Nelson spent his early childhood with his mother, Nosekeni Mandela, and two sisters in the village of Qutu, where he helped to herd cattle. His parents were devout Christians, and when Madiba was 7 years old, he was sent to a Methodist school, where his Methodist teacher gave him the English forename of Nelson. Nelson continued his education at a Methodist mission school, and Christianity became a big part of his life. As well as being very interested in African history as taught by the village elders, he was also becoming influenced by anti-imperialism from a chief who would visit regularly. And despite the anti-imperialist rhetoric, however, he did not consider European colonialists as oppressors, but rather as benefactors, bringing to South Africa such things as education and other benefits. In 1939, Nelson enrolled at the elite black institution of the University of Fort Hare in the Eastern Cape to begin work on a bachelor's degree. There he studied English, anthropology, politics, native administration and Roman Dutch law. And it was here that Nelson met Oliver Tambo, with whom he would become a great friend, and they would be political allies for decades to come. He also became friends with people connected to the African National Congress, the ANC. The ANC wanted South Africa to gain independence from the British Empire, but Nelson resisted any involvement in anti-imperialism. By 1941, he had moved to Johannesburg, and he would secure himself a position as an articled clerk in a law firm. An articled clerk is someone who is studying to become a lawyer or accountant and works under the direct supervision of somebody already in that profession. At this law firm, Nelson became friends with more people connected to the ANC, as well as the Communist Party. And in particular, he befriended a man called Nat Bregman, a Jewish communist, who would become his first white friend, and it was through this friendship that Nelson began to attend Communist Party meetings. In 1943, Nelson enrolled at the University of the Witwatersrand to study law. Here he faced considerable racism as he was the only black student. And during his time here, he became friends with a number of liberal and communist students of different nationalities, and he was becoming increasingly politicized. He began making contacts with the ANC, and particularly his old friend Oliver Tambo, and it was now that Nelson decided to join the ANC. However, he was now very much opposed to the ANC approach of having a multiracial opposition to colonial rule, and despite his friendships with communists and other non-blacks, Nelson believed that it should be the black Africans to unite and fight for self-determination. It was this strongly held belief that young black South Africans should be the future of the nation that he wanted to mobilise the young population against imperialism. To that end, in 1944, he was part of a delegation that approached the ANC president, Alfred Bettini Zuma, and gained approval for the formation of the African National Congress Youth League, the ANCYL, of which Nelson served on its executive committee. In July of 1947, ANC Youth League president Anton Lembede became ill and died. He was succeeded as president by a more moderate Peter Mda, and the new president was open to the idea of cooperation with communists and non-blacks, something which Nelson was set against, and in fact that year had supported an unsuccessful campaign to have the un-African ideologues expelled. In the 1948 South African general election, in which only whites could vote, The Herenigde Nationale Party under new Prime Minister Daniel Francois Malan took power. The party were Afrikaner dominated, and as a result would soon join forces with the Afrikaner Party and form the National Party. The National Party were an openly racialist party, believing that the human species is naturally divided into races with distinct biological categories. They enforced this belief by introducing legislation to create racial segregation through apartheid throughout South Africa. Nelson, who by now was gaining increasing influence in the ANC, along with his allies, began urging direct action against apartheid. Inspired by the direct action being carried out by South Africa's Indian community, he began to encourage actions such as boycotts and strikes. ANC President A.B. Zuma, however, was against these measures and was subsequently removed as president through a vote of no confidence, and was replaced with the more militant-minded James Moroka. The ANC was now engaged in a more radical and revolutionary path, attributed in no small way to the guidance of Nelson Mandela and his colleagues. In March of 1950, Nelson replaced Zuma on the ANC National Executive, and in the same year he was elected as the national president of the ANC Youth League. There were a number of multiracial demonstrations against white minority rule, but Nelson maintained his opposition to the multiracial approach, and he brought this up at the 1951 ANC National Conference, but he was outvoted. And as a result, he reluctantly changed his approach and finally embraced the idea of a multiracial front against apartheid. His political influences were also changing by this point. His earlier sympathies with communism were born out of the idea of a classless society, which to Nelson was remarkably similar to the African way of life. But he was now reading literature by Vladimir Lenin, Mao Zedong, and Karl Marx. Nelson Mandela was now pursuing a Marxist philosophy, and he was taking a far more radical path that would now bring him under close attention of both the government and the law.